You are 20 years old, standing behind the counter of your grandfather's hardware store in a small Kentucky town where everyone knows everyone's business before they know their own. It is autumn 1942, and your hands smell of machine oil from fixing a neighbor's plow that morning. Your grandfather, Earl Hale, raised you after your parents died young, and he taught you two things that matter more than anything the Army will later teach you: patience and how to read wind across open ground when you're aiming a rifle at squirrels for supper. His old dog Scout sleeps by the stove, one ear twitching at every customer who walks through the door. Your girlfriend, Mary Ellis, works at the diner 2 doors down, and most evenings you walk her home past the feed store, past the church, past the same porches you've known your whole life. She wants to marry you before winter. You want that too, though neither of you says it plainly, because saying it plainly makes it feel breakable. Your grandfather doesn't talk about the first war he fought in France, but sometimes his hands shake when the radio mentions Europe, and you've learned not to ask why. Life here is small and slow and entirely yours. You plan to take over the store someday. You plan to marry Mary in the spring. You plan mostly to keep planning, because planning feels safer than admitting how fast the world outside Kentucky is changing, and how little say a boy like you will have in whether it reaches you.
The letter arrives on a gray November morning. Plain government paper with your name typed across the front. Your grandfather goes quiet the way he always does before saying something true. "Come home," he says, "even if it's just to bury me instead of the other way around." Mary cries at the train station, presses a small photograph of herself into your palm, and makes you promise to write every week. You promise easily, the way young men promise things they don't yet understand the weight of. The Army sends you to a training camp in Georgia, where instructors discover quickly that a Kentucky boy who's spent a decade shooting squirrels for supper can put a round through a target most trained men can barely see. They pull you aside, hand you a different rifle, a longer scope, and tell you that you have a gift most men would call a curse. You learn to lie motionless for hours, to read wind in blades of grass, to separate the part of your mind that pulls the trigger from the part that still writes. Letters home about Mary and the store and Scout, waiting by the stove. They teach you that patience is a weapon, and that stillness saves more lives than aggression ever will. Danny Rourke, a farm boy from Ohio with a talent for numbers and distances, becomes your spotter, and somewhere between the obstacle courses and the live fire ranges, he becomes the closest thing to a brother you've had since your parents died. By the time your ship crosses the Atlantic, you are no longer the boy who fixed plows and walked girls home past the feed store. You are something the war built, and it wants to see what that something can do. You are lying flat in wet grass, and your body has not moved in 4 hours. It is June 1944, hidden along a hedgerow, outside a French village whose name you will forget the shape of. Before you forget the shape of what happens here, Danny lies beside you, glass pressed to his eye, voice barely louder than breath. "Officer, 200 meters. By the stone wall." You shift your eye to the scope, millimeter by millimeter, the way training taught you. A German officer stands beside a low stone wall, studying a map, one hand on his hip like the morning already belongs to him. You do not think about his family. Thinking like that gets you killed, or worse, gets Danny killed. You think about wind, about drop, about the 400 yards of dead space between his chest and your finger. Danny's voice arrives again, smaller than a whisper. You're shot, your chest tightens in a way it never did shooting squirrels behind your grandfather's store, a tightness Georgia never fully trained out of you, no matter how many hours you spent learning to separate the boy from the weapon. You exhale, steady the crosshair, and let 4 months of training answer a question your conscience hasn't finished asking. The shot leaves the barrel before you consciously decide to fire it. The officer folds sideways against the wall and does not get up. For 1 full second, the world holds its breath. Then shouting erupts, a whistle cuts the air, and Danny is already moving. "They'll have a fix on the flash," he says. You knew that before you pulled the trigger. Every shot is a signature. You begin crawling backward through the hedgerow, and somewhere behind you, a man's map lies open on ground he will never study again. Machine gun fire chews through the branches above your head as you crawl, leaves falling onto your neck like green rain. You and Danny drop into a shallow depression behind a fallen tree, chests heaving. "Clean shot," Danny says, trying to sound steady. You do not answer. Instead, your eyes drift back toward the stone wall. toward the shape still lying where it fell, and something small and pale catches the light near the officer's outstretched hand, a photograph knocked loose from his jacket, half buried in the grass. You cannot look away from it. A woman. 2 children, no older than 7 or 8, squinting into the same kind of sunlight. Kentucky gets in late July. You think of Mary's photograph in your own breast pocket, of Scout waiting by the stove, of your grandfather's hands shaking whenever the radio mentions Europe. For the first time since Georgia, the ledger in your head refuses to stay closed. You tell yourself he was an officer, a legitimate target, a man giving orders that would have killed Americans by nightfall. You tell yourself this the way a man repeats, something he needs to be true, rather than something he knows to be true. Danny notices your silence and follows your eyes toward the wall. He says nothing, because there is nothing to say that hasn't already been said by the photograph itself. You crawl on, but the tightness in your chest doesn't loosen the way it did in training. And you begin to understand that the manual never covered this part, the part where the target keeps a face, and the face keeps children, and the children will grow up not knowing why their father never wrote again. You and Danny move low along the hedgerow, for nearly a mile before either of you speaks again. By the time you reach the rally point, a bombed-out farmhouse serving as forward command, your hands have finally stopped shaking. Danny's have not. How many is that for you now? He asks, not looking at you. You do not answer, because counting them makes them real, in a way that pulling the trigger somehow does not. And because the photograph in the grass has already made this one real enough. A sergeant named Voss approaches, chewing an unlit cigarette, eyes tired in the particular way that only men, who have survived multiple landings, ever look tired. Command wants you moved up the line, he says. There's a church tower outside the next village. Good sight lines, bad reputation. You ask what that means. Voss almost smiles, though there is no humor in it. Means the last 2 men who held that position didn't walk back down. Danny's eyes lift toward you, and in them you see the same thought you are having. Unspoken but shared, complete. That night before you march, you write to Mary. You tell her the weather is fine. You tell her you think of the store, of Scout, of the porch light she leaves on for her father. You do not tell her about the photograph in the grass. Some truths you are learning are not yours to send home. Danny watches you fold the letter and says nothing, but he understands exactly which kind of silence you are carrying, because he has started carrying pieces of his own. The church tower rises out of the village like a broken tooth, half its roof gone, stone-scarred black from an earlier shelling. From the bell chamber, you can see nearly a mile in every direction. Hours pass in near silence. Around midday, Danny finds something. A supply convoy moving slow along the river road, and behind it, a scattering of officers who believe this stretch of road is safe. One stops to light a cigarette, entirely unaware that 400 yards above him, a decision is quietly reforming itself. Heavier this time than it was in the hedgerow. Danny reads the wind, the range, the drop, his voice steady in your ear. This time you do not let your mind empty the way it did before. You force yourself to look for a wedding ring, a photograph, anything that might turn a silhouette back into a stranger's father. You find nothing you can be certain of. Only a man doing his job the way you are doing yours. And you understand, with a coldness that frightens you more than the shot itself. That certainty was never something this war intended to give you. Your hand finds the trigger without asking your conscience for permission a second time. The shot cracks through the tower like a whip. The convoy scatters, trucks swerving, men diving for the ditches. A round punches through the stone beside your head, close enough that fragments cut your cheek. "Sniper in the tower!" a voice shouts in German. You and Danny stumble down the broken stairs as the first mortar round lands behind the church. "We run or we die in a church," Danny says. And you both step out into the open, into a war that now knows both your names. You run because stopping means dying, and for nearly 200 yards there is nothing in the world except your own breath and the sound of Danny's boots striking the earth beside you. Bullets snap through the grass around your ankles, close enough to feel the air split, far enough that neither of you falls. You reach a shallow irrigation ditch and drop into it together, chests heaving, hands shaking in a way that has nothing to do with cold. For a moment, you allow yourself to believe you have outrun it. Whatever it is, the tower, the war, the particular fury of men you shot from a place they could not reach. Then Danny makes a sound you have never heard him make before. A short, sharp exhale that is not quite a word. You turn and see the dark stain already spreading across his side, blooming through fabric the way ink spreads through water. "It's nothing," he says, though his voice has gone thin and strange. You know immediately that it is not nothing. You press your hands against the wound, feeling warmth pooled between your fingers, feeling the particular helplessness of a man trained to end lives suddenly forced to save one. Danny's breathing turns shallow, quick, frightened in a way. The calm voice in your ear never once sounded During 4 hours of stillness, in a hedgerow that now feels like it belonged to another lifetime, talk to me, you say, because that is what they teach you. Keep them talking, keep them here. Danny's hand finds yours, weak but insistent, and presses something small and hard into your palm. His spotting scope's rangefinder card, the one he has carried since training, edges worn smooth from 4 fingers running across it during 100 quiet, frightened mornings just like this one. Finish it without me, Danny says, and you tell him to stop talking like that. Tell him the medics are close. Tell him a lie so thin you can hear it fail, even as it leaves your mouth. He smiles anyway, the way men do when they have already made peace with something you are still refusing to accept. You always read the wind wrong when I'm not calling it, he says, and somehow, in the middle of a ditch with his blood soaking through your fingers, you almost laugh because it is exactly the kind of thing Danny would say, stubborn and gentle at the same time, right up until the very end. You drag him another 50 yards to a fold in the earth deep enough to offer real cover, propping him against the bank, pressing your jacket hard against the wound the way you were trained, though nothing in that training prepared you for whose blood you would eventually be trying to stop. Artillery continues somewhere behind you, and the war does not pause for what is happening in this ditch, does not care that a farm boy from Ohio is running. Out of time, 30 yards from a church, tower he never should have had to defend. Danny's grip weakens gradually, not suddenly, which is somehow worse. A slow fading rather than a clean break, like a radio signal losing strength mile by mile until only static remains. His last words are not dramatic. He simply says your name once, quietly, the way he said distances and wind speeds 100 times before. Calm even now. Calm because calm is the only language he ever fully trusted. Then his hand goes still in yours, and the rangefinder card remains in your palm, and you are alone. In a ditch in France with a war that has not finished asking things of you, you carry Danny's body as far as you can, until other men from the line find you both in the fading afternoon light, until hands that are not yours take him gently and tell you there is nothing more to be done. You do not remember walking back to the rally point. You remember only fragments, Sergeant Voss's face when he sees you arrive alone, the unlit cigarette falling from his mouth, the particular silence that settles over men who understand exactly what an empty space beside you means without needing to ask. That night, you sit outside the ruined farmhouse and take the rangefinder card from your pocket, turning it over in your fingers the way Danny once did, edges worn smooth from 100 mornings of quiet counting. You do not cry, not yet, because crying requires a kind of stillness the war has not yet allowed you to have. Instead, you clean your rifle by lamplight, hands steady out of habit rather than calm, and you think about the officer by the stone wall, and the man on the river road, and Scout running through your grandfather's yard in a country that feels impossibly far away now. Further than an ocean, further than the 400 yards that separated you from every man you have ever killed. Voss sits down beside you without a word, offers you a cigarette you do not want but take anyway, because refusing feels like refusing the only kindness left in the entire war. Command wants you back on the line tomorrow, he says eventually, quietly, as if the words themselves might break something. You nod because there is nothing else to do, because the war does not pause for grief, does not care that a farm boy's voice will never again read wind speed into your ear. Calm and certain right before you take another breath, and another shot, and another piece of yourself you will never fully get back. Years later, you are sitting in a small hardware store you never expected to own, in a town in Kentucky where the war rarely follows you into daylight anymore, though it still finds you most nights, in dreams shaped like church towers and hedgerows, and a voice reading distances that no longer exists. Your grandchildren know you fought in the war. They do not know the ledger you kept for decades in your head, silent, exact. A number you have never spoken aloud to anyone, not your wife, not the men at the Veterans Hall who ask carefully phrased questions over coffee. On your desk sits a small worn card, edges soft from being turned over thousands of times, a rangefinder that no longer calculates anything except the exact size of the space one person can leave behind. You never learned Danny's family's address. You wrote a letter once, folded it, and never sent it because some words feel too small for what they are meant to carry. And you were never certain his mother would want to know the truth, that her son died calm, calling directions to a friend who could not save him no matter how steady his hands were. You do not tell your grandchildren about the stone wall, or the river road, or the ditch. You tell them only that you had a friend, once who could read wind better than anyone alive, and that friendship, out there, sometimes cost more than anyone back home could ever understand. Some nights, you still hear him, calm, certain, counting yards and wind speed into an earpiece that stopped existing decades ago. You do not call it haunting. You call it company, because the war took nearly everything from you, but it never once managed to take the sound of his voice. Steady, patient, telling you exactly where to aim, and exactly when it was time to finally come home.